Okay, wow, we've got 2 hours to go through, talk about wood windows. My name is Mark Hillam. I'll stand here and I'll do a quick introduction. I came to this sort of in a roundabout way out of necessity, learning how to work on these wood windows and in historic preservation, building technology, I guess is what I'd call it. I spent some time me and my wife, we owned an old house in Provo. It was built in the 1870s, an old adobe. And I have this in the bio, but we one day were doing some yard work, some landscaping, and we tore out the bush on the corner of our house. And most of that corner was not there. It had gone missing. It had melted away. And I remember the time thinking, what in the world am I going to do? How are we going to fix this thing? You know, and I remember calling around and trying to find a brick mason to come and look at it. And I'd have people come and look, and they had no idea what to do with it. They're like, just stucco it, put some more bricks in there, put concrete in there, do whatever you can, just fill it in, which to me seemed odd. And I thought, why on earth would I do that when there's more than likely a correct way to fix this? So I spent time online looking around. I found, at the time, the Traditional Building Skills Institute down at Snow College. Some of you guys might know, yeah? And they had a workshop for Adobe. And I took that workshop, and I learned how to fix Adobe. And then I got sucked down a rabbit hole of preservation technology. And I ended up spending 2 years down there, and I did all their workshops, and I ended up really getting into sort of the nuts and bolts of preservation and how to actually do some of the work. And it was really exciting, and that's sort of where I ended up in the preservation trades, I guess, as it were. So that's a little bit about my background. So that was back in 2003 or 2, I believe. And of course, TBSI is gone. But since then, it's put me down this path of, working on old houses. I've owned a few more since then, and I love it. So that's a little bit about my background. Caitlyn's turn.
Yeah, so I'm Caitlyn Barhorst. I tell people that I'm a big nerd about windows. I think the main reason why I kind of feel so connected to it is that one of my kind of mentors that I connected with online about just window preservation stuff, she told me once that, well, hands built it so hands can fix it. And I was like, yes, like this is so cool. And, anything old really is the same concept. I just bought my first home, historic, trying to renovate it, all that, restored a gas stove from the 50s. That's very, there's no computers in it, hands built it so hands can fix it, that type of thing. So I just kind of fell into it as well, I guess, through education. I went to grad school in Indiana and have a dual master's in architecture and historic preservation. So took some workshops there, took the window workshop 3 years ago here in Utah, and just have been sort of dreaming up my own sort of window world, trying to start restorations around town and stuff like that. So for whatever reason, I'm here teaching this workshop today and tomorrow, and I'm super excited about it. And yeah, 2 hours is a long time. So we have sort of a presentation that Mark put together, awesome photos, and then we have some tools and some show and tell. We want it to be very interactive with questions and super casual. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the goal here is this is a little bit different than maybe some of the other workshops today. I'm going to go through a process and steps and try to start at the beginning of how to deal with some of these historic wood windows, and hopefully go through that whole process, and at the end, see how that all fits back together. And I think for me, coming at this, my main job or main career is in the bicycle industry, and I sit there and think of how do these two relate, and maybe they don't. But if, a bicycle is a design that's been around for 100 years, and it's incredibly simple, and it's incredibly efficient. And it really hasn't changed much over time, right? It's something that just works. And I think what we're going to talk about today was some of these wood windows, and I think today I'm going to focus on just double hung windows. It's a design that's been around who knows how long, I think maybe the 1500s somewhere, or even older. And it's a design that's incredibly simple and very efficient and just works very well. And it's easy to make, it's easy to maintain. And I think as we go through this process, it'll be apparent that it's something that if you're a homeowner and you want to tackle this job yourself, you can do it. And that's sort of how I wrote this presentation. I'm a homeowner. That's how I came into this, was out of necessity. And I'm the kind of person that's, okay, I want to know how things work. From a young age, I take things apart and I put them back together again, just for the heck of it, because I want to figure out how it all goes together. And so that's the way I've approached this presentation. This is a house that me and my family own, and this is down in Escalante, Utah. You guys know where Escalante is, down the Grand Staircase. And this is the, I think this is the window right here that we're going to talk about today. And this is the Spencer family that built this home. I believe it was probably 1890s sometime. And these windows are all still in place. They're the original windows. They've been there for a long time, but they've never been maintained. And I think this is something that you're going to see, or maybe you already see it in your own home or on jobs, that a lot of the reason that these wood windows get a bad rap or get replaced is because of deferred maintenance. People don't take care of them. They get painted shut. They get taped over. They get, in the case of this house, there was a mattress in front of one of them because there was air coming through. And so people think, well, they're not efficient. I got to replace them. And you've got maybe salespeople coming through trying to sell you vinyl windows, and they sell you sort of the story that you're going to gain tons of energy efficiency by replacing these old windows. And we know that there's been a lot of work to show that that's not true, that you can take these wood windows and put them back into service with relatively little expertise, a lot of work, and very few tools. So I guess to start, if I can get this to go. Oh no. Oh. So this is what the Secretary of Interior Standards, this is their reasons. If you come to this from a historic preservation perspective, these are all great reasons to restore these windows. It's the original intent. They've been there from the beginning. The house looks a certain way, and if you pull them out and put something in like vinyl or some kind of replacement, it completely changes the look of that house and the original intent. So these are all great reasons to want to do it. Another one, financial. I think if you were to replace all your windows in your house, you're talking about a significant amount of money. This is something you can do as a homeowner, or you can hire somebody to do one window at a time. You can work as needed, and you don't have a huge financial outlay. Materials are relatively inexpensive. You don't have to invest a lot in tools, although you can. You can always spend a ton of money on tools, but you don't need to. And this process I'm going to show today will help you understand that better. And then this is probably, I don't know, this could maybe be the beginning. This is a really good reason not to replace your windows and to rehab what you have. This is what I call the world's most beautiful landfill. It's down in Escalante. You go down there and dump your stuff, and it's incredible. And you feel guilty the whole time you're doing it. So we want to keep things out of the ground. I mean, there's just no reason to throw these away. These wood windows, at the last point there, infinitely repairable. They are never or rarely a lost cause. I mean, there are certain situations where maybe that's the case, but we'll demonstrate and show you some stuff that you really can bring these back almost to new. So I'm going to start out here just talking about some of the things you need. And, anytime you're working on an old house, I just assume there's lead paint somewhere. That's just a given. So you've always got to have the right protection, a mask, depending on what you're doing. Maybe you have a Tyvek suit. Just the basics there that I think everybody is aware of when you're working on an old home. These are some of the basic tools. And I just threw this up there because I think just to demonstrate that you probably already own most of these tools or have access to them. And really, you don't need special tools unless you want to do it. But here are some of the specialty tools that make the job easier. So for example, if you're going to do 10 windows or a whole house or whatever, it's worth the investment on some of this stuff because it's just going to make the job better and easier, faster, end up with a better result. But you don't need these unless you really want them. Materials. As I said before, not a huge outlay in money. The most expensive up here is that wood epox and liquid wood. But you're talking about a glazing putty that's relatively inexpensive, glazing points that are super inexpensive, sash ropes if you're going to replace those on your double hung window. So there's not a lot of money to be spent on materials, and which makes it easier for you. So the double hung window, and this is where we're going to start and maybe talk about some of these details. This is probably the most, from my experience, the most common window type in Utah or in historic architecture, especially anything built up into the 1920s and even beyond. But of course, there's other kinds of wood windows, casement, awning types. But this double hung design is the one that's been around forever. It functions very well, and it's very simple. And we're going to talk about how to deal with these different sash. You got an upper and a lower sash. You've got some pulley weights maybe. You've got some channels that these sashes run in. Okay? And what's so cool about a double hung window or a wood window, just about any kind of wood window, is they were made to be repaired. So none of the joints in these sashes have glue. If they do have glue, someone's maybe repaired it the wrong way. They're pinned together with a wooden dowel or even just a square piece of wood. And those corners are pinned together. And to disassemble this, you're just removing 4 pins when you get it to the right point, and that whole thing comes apart. And you can make any kind of needed repair. So they're really a smart, simple design that you'll see. I got to get the right button here. So whenever I start any project, and I think this is true of any preservation project, you've got to go through and look at the condition and to see what you're dealing with. And in the case of windows, if you're doing a whole house, take the time and go through and document every window and really understand what you're dealing with. That way you can plan your materials, you can plan how you're gonna tackle the job. In this case, we're just going to talk about this one window in that house and the condition it's in. And this is that corner window in that house I just showed you. This is the exterior, obviously, and then the interior. And having looked at this for now a couple of years, before I haven't done this window yet, but I've done most of the ones on this house, you can see all these problems. At one point, this sash was up here, and they probably had an air conditioning unit in here, and they just never finished painting it. You can see that there's some, real problems here with this window. Missing trim, brick molding here on the edge is gone. You see where putty has just fallen out here. And where this window seal there's paint failure here, and then the seal itself is sloping inward, so water's coming down and going back through the window seal, into the brick wall. Just water will cause all kinds of damage. Also, UV exposure causes that damage. You can see here a loose sash pin, and this meeting rail is sagging, and all this putty failure here. So this window has probably had 80 years of deferred maintenance. It probably, who knows when it got worked on last time, or if it ever got worked on. But here it is, over 100 years later. It's still going, not functioning the way it's supposed to, but it's still there. And on the inside, you can see some damage, right? You get some water coming in here, and this could be from condensation. You can see, it's kind of hard to tell here, but you can see this meeting rail. These two, this is the upper sash, this is the lower sash. They should meet here and create a tight fit. This is sagging. It's lost its shape for whatever reason, usually water. And this is the beginning of some serious failure going on. And here it is, this nice big gap up here. That meeting rail is going down, the putty's failing on the outside, and that piece of glass is just slowly moving down. This one had duct tape over it. It had packing tape. There was ones with cloth jammed in there. One of the windows, again, I think maybe it was the front door, had a mattress over it. People do all kinds of stuff to try to fix these little holes because you got air coming through and it's cold or it's hot. This just causes, those kinds of fixes end up causing more problems. You'll see people put in a silicone, caulk in there thinking, okay, I just got to get this thing sealed up. And if they just take the time or knew how to take the time and fix it properly, you wouldn't have to mess with it for another, 30 or 40 years. But instead, they do a quick repair and you end up making the problem worse. It gets progressively worse. I'm never going to get used to this button. If you guys have any questions about this, please, we have plenty of time. So if you have questions or if I'm not explaining something properly, let me know, and we can stop. So where I'm going to start, that conditions assessment, you looked at this window and you say, okay, just fix it with it in place. I don't even have to take it out. Sometimes there's putty repair where you only got maybe 2 or 3 inches that's fallen out. You can make that repair with the window and the sash in place. You don't have to take it out. Where this one had that meeting rail that was completely sagging and falling away and a loose joint pin, to me it's like, okay, let's just take it out. Let's disassemble it, put it back together, pin it right, straighten out that rail, and do sort of a full disassembly of that sash. That's not always necessary. What I'm going to show you here today is how to do that, so that you can see how that works, the different steps. But you make that determination, obviously, when you're looking at these windows. And it all depends on the side of the house it's on, west, north, south, what kind of exposure is going on, where water has come in. You know, of course, water entropy, it's going to destroy everything eventually. So there's all kinds of issues like that. So when you're making your assessment, you know, maybe not every sash needs to be extensively redone. Maybe only a part of it. So I'm going to show the process here of how to take it out. And this is another thing you'll see is how simple this design is for a double hung window. So first step is you've got on the inside what's called a stop, okay? And as we mentioned before, these windows have been painted over and over and over and over again. They've been painted shut. You know, maybe that has something to do with central heating and air back in whenever that happened in the 50s and 60s. They shut it, they painted it. Well, we've got AC now. We don't ever need to open this window. Who cares? And it just keeps getting painted, and it keeps getting painted. So what you're dealing with is just a lot of paint buildup. And so what I do, you know, this first step is you get your utility knife and you go through and you clean out every joint you can that you know has got that paint buildup, and you're going to need to get that broken free. And this can take time. It can be kind of frustrating, but you just slowly work through it. And you know, you use a utility knife, you use a small pry bar, and typically these stops are nailed in with 2 or 3 nails only. They're very easy to pull off once you break that paint seam. You know, you just gently pull that off. And as you do this, you're only taking one side off to get the sash out. You don't have to take all the stops off unless you want to. You're just taking off the one. And then just here's more of an example of just slowly working your way up, and you can see there's a finished nail here that came through. You've got a miter joint up here you got to be careful of with a knife to make sure that that doesn't break away. You know, I always use channel locks when you pull these stops off to grab these nails from the inside and pull them out that way, so you're not pounding it through and breaking away and ruining that piece of stop. I always try to save the original stops and parting beads, because often the stops are you know, something you want to save. The parting bead's a little bit different. We'll show you that. Outside, same thing. You've got to score where you know this thing needs to be freed up. And this can take time. Usually you can do it with just a putty knife or with a sash saw, which is I left downstairs, which is a specialty tool. But you're just trying to break this free, okay? This thing is just been painted shut, so that's what you want to break free. And the same goes for the inside. It's all been painted shut, and you can see here's the parting bead between, this is the lower sash channel where we took off the stop, and you just cut all that stuff with your utility knife. Once you have it loose, and you'll tell when you get it finally break loose. It'll move around in there. You'll feel it rattle a little bit, and it might go back and forth a little bit. So you're like, okay, you know, I made progress. I can get this thing out. It might take a little work to lift it, to force it up, and you have to be really careful with that. You know, the tendency is to grab a pry bar, and I want to get under this thing and really crank on it to push it up in its channel. You want to avoid that. You want to just take your time. You want to work slowly, and even if you're just, you know, 1/4 inch here, 1/4 inch there, and just slowly getting it up in its channel. And in the case of this window, it has what are called sash pins. This doesn't have the counterweights. This just has either 1 or 2 pins in the sash and a hole, corresponding couple of holes in the channel. So when you raise and lower that, those are spring-loaded pins, and they go into the hole. So you've got a couple of preset locations to open and close that window. So in this case, you're pulling this pin out, and you're lift the sash up above seal down here, and then you just swing it out. And so you're keeping one channel, this left side, in place. The stop's there. There's no need to take that out. You swing it out, and then the sash is out. Now, in the case of the counterweights here, you'll have the sash rope pinned in to a mortise on the side of the sash. And usually what they used to do is put a small nail through the knot into that thing, and it'll hold it in place. You can just pull that nail out. The cord will come out. The weight will drop. You just want to make sure these cords don't go inside here. You'll lose them in the wall. I mean, you can get them out through this sash pocket if there is one. Not all windows have them. Sometimes you have to take the actual molding off the front of the inside to get to that weight pocket. So you want to make sure you don't lose those guys in the wall. Sometimes you're going to have to do it anyway because you're going to see a broken rope, and with nothing here to pull on, so you know that weight is lost down there, and you're going to have to pull the trim off or do something, get the pocket open to get access to that weight.
Will that often be done like in the wall or just in the wall by the window?
So usually just in the wall by the window, there'll be a pocket for those things to ride in. And it's kind of interesting because some of the houses, like this house in Escalante, the front half of the house, the upper windows have no sash pins. They're a guillotine. So you lift that thing up, you got to put a stick in to hold it open. The main house, they had a little bit more money, maybe. They had sash pins. And then they did an addition in the 19-teens, and they put in double hung windows with counterweights. So they had the whole thing. And so in one house, you'll see a variation of all that kind of stuff. Okay?
If you lose that weight in there, can you then just use sash pins instead?
You could, but it's actually, you could. But I think you'll find that pulling off the casing, usually.
You can actually get like a small multi-tool and cut your own pocket again if there's not one already built in. It's kind of a, next phase, of kind of an intro class, but there's plenty of videos actually. I spend a lot of time on YouTube and Instagram just watching people, different ways they repair windows. It's actually pretty easy to cut kind of into the casing part because it is like truly a pocket where the weight sits. So to kind of retrieve that and then to re-rope it, it's pretty easy.
So the other thing too that I would mention is that sometimes you don't think that pocket's there because it's been painted over so many times. So if you do a little bit of investigation, you're going to see usually a screw head here and here. Sometimes just here because it'll have like a beveled bottom that'll just fit in. So if you do some investigation and look around, you might just see that, not thinking you have that sash pocket. But Caitlyn's right, you could cut your own, or you can take off the piece of trim in the front. But they ride inside of two channels, and usually that channel stops at the bottom of the window seal. So it's not going to go all the way down into the wall. Although you never know. You just don't know. Like it's crazy. There's crazy stuff like that.
So my question is, if the rope breaks and the weight goes down the wall, do you have to get that out for the new broken weight?
I would get it out. I would definitely get it out. You can't put. I mean, you could put a pin in and not have weights. You could make it a guillotine window that just you use a stick. It would not interfere. It will definitely interfere.
It's actually pretty tight. There's really only enough space for both of the double hung
Yeah.
weights. to really.
And some windows will have a chain. Some will have a metal strip tape. Some of the more modern windows will have that, and they'll have a spring-loaded pulley. So there are options. If you do lose that weight, you can do a spring-loaded pulley with tape where, you know, it's all up here. So whatever's down here doesn't matter.
Everybody attention, spring or something.
But I try to get it out if you can. And I think, like the way Caitlyn described it, cutting your own hole there to get access to it is a great way to do it. And then that's a repair that'll go away, and you can.
If you have to cut your own little pocket cover, how do you get it to go back on without going off the screw?
Yeah.
It's a kind of a geometry thing. I guess we should like have a little whiteboard to sketch. But imagine like a trapezoid. Is that the right shape? Where you're cutting. Let me see that pointer. Which one is it? The red thing? Okay. So instead of like going directly in at a squared off angle with your tool, you'd actually go make a trapezoid. I'm going to try to draw like this. So it would be shaped where both the top is angled down, beveled, and then the bottom's angled up. So then it kind of comes out and you put it back in and just kind of tack it back. You basically, yeah, straight on the left and right, vertical, and then the horizontal cuts are the beveled in and beveled up kind of shape, trapezoid. Yeah, it'll fall back in, and then.
Well, you could also put a cleat on the back of this piece.
Yeah.
And if you put a cleat on the back of this piece here and piece here, you could then screw it in from the top and bottom into that cleat.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because you know, some houses like this building here, we were just looking at we're going to pull out tomorrow. It has pockets that you can access. Some of this stuff, like I work on down in Escalante, they just didn't have the resources, and they just made do with whatever, and they just took the trim off or just boarded them up, and you don't see this as nice as hardware as you do in some places. All right, so let's see. So here's the parting bead. So you've got the two sashes. You've got the outer sash and the inner sash. The outer is always on the top. The inner's on the bottom. So the stop on the inside of the window frame is for that inner sash, okay? And then what's holding the upper sash in, or the lower sash, what's holding the upper sash in is this parting bead. And these guys get destroyed, taken. And typically what we used to do with these is they would just pressure fit them in. They're not nailed in usually, although you will see them. Yeah, so there you can see that you can use. I use channel locks, or you can use duck build vice grips, but you clamp on this guy with the sash all the way down, and you slowly just wiggle it back and forth, and you work it out of its rabbit, out of its channel. And this can take time, and I've broken a ton of these. So it's nice if you have a table saw, or even Home Depot and even Ace Hardware sell parting beads. So typically, you know, if you do break it, it's not the end of the world. I try to save them. Where it really gets tricky is when you run into this meeting rail between the top and the bottom sash. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's got a bevel, okay? And most of them do. And when you have a bevel, so when those two sashes are closed, they meet. What's difficult is getting this parting bead past this bevel without breaking it. So what I do is I take this upper sash and I push it all the way down on its channel, all the way down to the seal. And then I slowly work from the top on the parting bead, pulling it out. And then when I get down to the bottom, I just have this little section that I've got to pull out, sort of up and out, to get it out of there. So, I don't know, I did this window and I got this one all the way down and I broke off a piece, I think 2 inches at the bottom.
When someone asks a question, can you repeat it into the
Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's the parting bead. And then once you have that parting, same as the lower sash, you pull the pin out, you swing it out, and you can just lift the sash right out of there. And if it does have a pulley, you can, have an assistant, or you can just pull the rope out of there and gently let it go up to the pulley, and then you can take the whole sash out. So that's how you get them out. It's really simple. You've got 2 pieces of wood, but you've got a ton of paint that you're dealing with. And that just makes things harder and makes it take longer. So just be prepared to deal with that. The next thing is deglazing. And you're going to see that when you get this thing out of there, a lot of times the putty is so dry and broken up, it's just going to fall right out. And so what I do is I'll go through and with a brush or just something just to knock that stuff loose, just so you can get as much of it out of there as you possibly can. What you want to avoid, you're going to have this seam right here, or you're going to have it here on the glass. You're thinking, I'm just going to get my razor knife under there. I'm just going to poke a little chisel in there or whatever, thinking you're going to knock it off. And sometimes it'll knock off, but a lot of times you end up breaking the glass. It doesn't take much to just, especially if you put something in there and you think, I'm not going to twist it, but you twist it and boom, you're done. The glass will go. So the goal with this deglazing, especially on an old window, because you want to save it if it's got, old glass in it, you just don't be in a hurry on this part. Take your time, and if that putty sticks, don't try to pry it out. Don't be tempted by doing that, because it will cause tons of problems. It'll break the glass. So what I do is I use a heat gun, or I use an infrared paint stripper. It's a great way to do it. You don't have to heat this up very much to get that putty to loosen up enough to come out. So, it's not like it's going to take a lot of heat. And with heat guns, you always want to use them on a low setting, and you're not going to want to keep them on there for very long. I use an old dry knife, like a 10-inch knife at an angle like that, just to keep heat away from the glass, because if you overheat it, you can easily crack the glass too. So I just work in these 10-inch increments with a putty knife, the heat gun, or an infrared stripper, which we can show you here in a minute, to soften the putty up. And you'll see as you get it to the right temperature, it'll just push right out. It'll come right out of there. You can also use steam. There's a lot of guys or people that do this professionally. They'll have a steam box, and they'll put that sash in a steam box for 30, 40 minutes or whatever. I'm not even sure what the temperature gets up to. They come out, and you can just push all that putty right out of there. If you go online and watch some of those videos, it's pretty impressive. But a steam box takes time to make. It's also expensive if you buy one. So you can do it with a heat gun. And then you can see here, you just, once it's warmed up, you're just pushing that out. And this is where, you're going to be running into what are called glazing points. And there is one right there. And there's a couple of different kinds of these over the years. You see some shaped like diamonds. Typically on older windows are shaped like a diamond. You see them shaped like a triangle. The new ones are called push pins, where it's more like used for framing pictures, but they work great for windows too. So you'll see a lot of different types of these glazing pins and points. You just got to make sure you get them all. And it's funny because as you're working through this stuff, sometimes there'll be one or two in there, and you're thinking, well, that person was just lazy or whatever, they didn't put enough in. Or other times you'll see 5 or 6 just on one side, and it's like, well, they went overboard. So don't assume as you're going through here, getting all this putty out, that you've got them all until you go around that thing and really look, because sometimes they'll just be hiding, just barely poking out enough. When you push the glass out, it's going to stop it from going, and you got pressure on there, it'll crack. This is a great tool, specialty tool, if you want to get that, but it's essentially a chisel with a ball bearing on it, and you can run that thing across the rail at the right angle, at this totally square angle, and it'll help you push that putty out of there. So that's kind of a nice specialty tool to have if you've got a lot of work to do. But the key with this is you want to get all rabbit is where the glass sits, right? You're pushing the glass out of there. Any kind of place for that glass to catch, a pin, a glazing point, any protrusion of dried putty, it doesn't take much to break the glass. So I try to go through and clear off as much of this as I possibly can. Make sure those margins are all clear so that the glass will come out without being broken. And then taking the glass out, you want to label it so you know where it goes, because they're all different. None of them are the same. They're off by a 1/16 here. They're narrower at the top than they are at the bottom. So that's a critical step. You want to make sure you label that, because once you pull them all out, especially if you're doing a bunch of them, you got them all stacked up there and you haven't labeled them, then you're going to waste a lot of time trying to figure out where they go. Then once you're ready to go, you just get underneath it with your hands and you slowly work around. You never want to go too far on any one of them. I slowly work around it and make sure it's just coming up in all locations. You never want to just push all the way up from one side unless you know that those margins are all free. So that's pretty basic. But the key with that is get rid of those points and make sure the putty's not in the glazing channel. And then for paint removal, this is really sort of the guidelines I use. Most of these sashes are going to be repainted, so I really don't feel like it's necessary to strip them down to bare wood. You can, if you want. You can use all kinds of ways to do that. I try to just sand as much as I need to sand to have the new paint adhere and look good. If you've got some windows that were maybe originally never painted and you want to go back to that original finish, you can. A lot of them have been sanded or painted, so it's not really important. The one thing that is important is these running surfaces. So where this sash rides in its channel, here on the side, here on the top, this is actually upside down. You can see how these were never painted. Intent from the beginning. So that part painted it. Be free of paint. These form so that when that thing is back in its channel, it can move. Paint, gum it up. So that's the one. One at Harbor Freight, with a couple cutting heads on there. You can buy specialty ones from some of the resources we've listed. But scraping paint is scraping paint. You guys kind of probably know how to do that. This is a picture of that infrared stripper, and that's a great way to get paint off. And the reason that's a great way is it never gets up hot enough to have that paint release any of its lead fumes. So it's a super safe way to do it. I think it only gets up like 400 degrees or something like that. And I think lead paint, if you get it above 900 degrees, is when it can be dangerous. So these things are great. They heat a different way. They dissolve at $130. There's some out there that you can spend $500 or $600 on them if you really want to. And I always like to do chemical stripping if I don't. It's an easy thing to deal with. There's some there. Heat gun can work too. You just have to be careful on the temperature. One with low is the best. And then sanding, do it by hand. If you're going to use an orbital, up to a shop vac with a HEPA filter. You can also use wet dry sandpaper and get the thing moist. It'll keep the dust down. Because the last thing you want to do is inhale any of that stuff. Okay. Is there any questions about that, you guys? Am I going too fast? Not. I had COVID 3 months ago, so I have COVID voice. It's your test. Sorry. I'll try not to. I think it's there. Okay. Where were we? Okay, so repairing the sash. And this is, you can do it without disassembling it, obviously. I like in this case because this pin right here, which is used to hold that joint together, was loose and basically coming out. You've also got this big check right here. And you've got some issues here you want to deal with. This meeting rail is lowered down because of this problem. So what I like to do if I'm disassembling it, you locate these pins. And older windows will have a wooden pin like that. And there'll be a single pin usually per joint. Newer windows, they'll use a metal nail, like a finished nail cut in half. They'll use one or sometimes two per joint. So if you run into that kind of window where you found one nail, don't assume there's just one nail. There might be another one. And oftentimes they're under the surface. You kind of have to dig for them. You do a little bit of, cutting with a knife or a chisel to get to that nail in order to pull that pin out. But if you don't pull it out and you try to separate it, you're going to destroy that lap joint. The wooden pins can be drilled out. Just make sure you mark your drill bit so that it's not going all the way through the sash. It only needs to go through 3/4 of it to get all the lap joints free. And so drill those out, and then you just tap it apart. Pretty easy. And then you can break it down into its component pieces. Couple of different kinds of repair, and Caitlyn will show you this one. This stuff is called, it's made by a company called Avatron, and I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but you can see this piece. It goes from completely rotted out to this process of adding an epoxy consolidant, adding an epoxy putty, and then you can end up sanding it and milling it just like regular wood. So when you see, this is the lower rail of a bottom sash, and these rot out for obvious reasons. They're down there with lots of water on them, riding in water all the time. The capillary action is going up there, and it's just rotting it out. So when you see something like that, it's not a lost cause. That window doesn't need to be thrown out. You can fix it. And this Abitron wood epox and liquid wood is a great option if you're going to paint the sash again. Obviously, if you're not going to paint it, maybe you'd want to replace that with what's called a Dutchman repair, where you cut out the rot, you glue in wood to fix that, and this is an example of that here. So any of these pieces can be either through epoxy, through a Dutchman repair, or just replacing them. You're replacing maybe one of the pieces, not all four. And then you have a sash that works again. And then putting it back in, it's pretty straightforward. These pins, I just cut a square pin and square peg in a round hole is what you end up doing. And that goes in, and it will bind that joint together incredibly. You'll be amazed at how tight it is. And then you just trim that off with a handsaw to get back to a complete frame or a sash. So that's the sort of the basics of repair. You can, when you have the thing completely disassembled, you could also strip it and sand it. Maybe it's easier to do that with it disassembled. You don't have to do that, but you can. Reglazing, and this is what we're going to show you here with this window at the end of this presentation, is pretty straightforward as well. Now, this is the glazing rabbet. This is where the glass is going to go back in. And the key important thing to do, some people at this point will prime the whole sash, which you can do. It's fine. I tend not to do that. I use linseed oil on this surface. A lot of the real traditionalists will use shellac. And the whole point of it is you want to create a barrier so that when you put the bedding putty back into this channel, that the wood's not going to suck all of the oil and moisture out of that putty. So linseed oil works great. Sometimes if the sash is really dry, you might have to put a bunch of linseed oil on there to really get it saturated in. Shellac would seal it off really quick. Primer, same thing, would seal it off. So any of those are acceptable solutions. I think you've done it the way with primer, right? And that's a great way to go too. But in this demonstration, I'm just showing you how I do it with linseed oil. And I think it's raw or boiled. I think boiled just dries faster than raw, but you can use any kind of linseed oil there. And then the next step would be taking glazing compound or putty, and you create a bed for the glass to sit on, right? So that putty is in there, you push that glass in, it's going to create a seal on the inside of the sash, which is the inside part of the window. So you place it all the way around in all of the glazing rabbet, and then you put the glass back in, and it's the same orientation you took it out as. Okay, and that's pretty critical because you don't want it won't go in. Oftentimes, too, when you've disassembled a sash, it might be racked a little bit. It may not be totally square, and you might have to do a little tweaking with it to get the glass to go back in there, but not much usually. And then what I do is bedding that glass. You want to avoid pushing it from the center of the glass for obvious reasons. If there's too much pressure on the center and you've got a part going down here and this part's not going down over here, you create this uneven balance where you could potentially break it. So I go through and just work my way around it, doing small steps to get that glass to bed. I've seen some guys at the National Park Service, they use a orbital sander without a sanding pad on there, and they turn it on and put it on the glass, and it basically vibrates it into place. I've never dared do that. But just working with your hands slowly, you can get it back in there. And the idea is you want that thing to be fully seated down. You don't want any high or low spots. So you want to just double check that you've got it fully seated in the bedding, okay? The next thing is, and this is not the greatest photo, but you can see this is the glazing pin right here. This is what's called a push pin, and we have some examples up here, but it has these little tabs right here that you can use a putty knife, and you have the point here, and you're pushing it into the muntin or into the wood, okay? And that's important that when you're doing this, that you're keeping that putty knife as horizontal to the glass surface as possible. You don't want to come in at an angle.
There's a question online about whether or not you need to do anything differently if you're dealing with stained glass.
Yes. Yeah. Stained glass. So stained glass, well, where to start on that? Yeah, because like stained glass itself, if you're using, there's a certain type of cement for glass inside of its came, which is the lead came divided. If it's a true stained glass window like that, there's a certain type of cement that you need to use or putty to fill any gaps there. Where it sits into the glazing rabbet in a wooden frame, I think the steps could be the same. I think oftentimes what you see with stained glass is instead of putty, you'll see a piece of wood trim holding it in place. But what the cement you use in a stained glass window is different than this putty that you use on a regular glass. Yeah, that's a whole different class, I think. It's a fun one, though. So I say at least 2 pins per glass edge. I really, if it's a big piece of glass, maybe you're doing it every 6 inches. But you really want to support that glass all the way around its 4 sides. It's really key. So you don't want to just have a single one. Usually it's at least 2, maybe more. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but these push pins, they're easy to use. They're not always the best option. And we'll talk about that when we're putting in here in the next step where you're tooling the putty on the opposite side of we'll talk about the sight line is what we're going to talk about. Once the pins are all in, you can turn it over and you're going to see all the squeeze out from the bedding putty, okay? And you just want to go and clean that up with a knife. And sometimes you'll see voids where maybe it didn't come all the way through. Just fill all those voids. So you want this uniform seal on that side of the glass. So you can really clean it up pretty quickly. Now, the next step is getting this putty into the glazing rabbet on top of the glass. And everybody has sort of a different method. You see people online, they roll them out and they'll lay them in there and then push it in. Or some guys that are really fast will have a clump of putty in their hand and they'll just use the heel of their palm and push it into there. The goal, whatever way you do it, it doesn't really matter. The goal is you want to get this all in there without any voids. You want it to be packed in there. You don't have to push it really hard, but you want to be firm getting it in there, okay? Sometimes it won't stick very well. It might pull out on your hand. Some people don't use gloves. If you don't use a glove, maybe some of the oils out of the putty will, get pulled out of the putty into your hand. If you use a glove, sometimes the putty will stick to it. So it takes a little bit of practice to get it in there, but it's kind of fun and easy to do. This is the the final tooling you do. This is kind of a crazy big putty knife, because it's all I had that day. It does not need to be this big. In fact, there's you just find something. You find something that you like to use, right? And you don't need to spend, you probably already have something. If you have this, great, it'll work. If you don't, you just go spend $2 at Harbor Freight or wherever and get one of these. It's good to have a stiff knife and also a flexible one. But this is the goal here, is to get this nice tooled surface on that glazing putty. Now, the key to this, and it's kind of hard to explain here, you want to find the edge of the glazing rabbet on the other side of the glass. So the piece of wood is where you want to find that edge. And you're putting the point of this putty knife at that edge, okay? And the reason you want to do that is because if you don't do that and you say, okay, I'm just going to do a 45-degree angle on this, and that's all going to be great and fine, you flip that window over, you're going to see a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch line of putty, okay? So some older windows, especially multi-pane windows, they're going to have very narrow muntins, okay? They're going to have extremely narrow glazing rabbets. And it can be difficult to get that thing tooled so that the sight line, when you turn it around, isn't obscured by the putty. And this is also where, in that situation, I wouldn't use one of those push glazing points. I would use a diamond or a triangle shape and some type of way to drive that in, because you can push that type of pin into the wood farther, okay? A push pin, you can only go a certain distance, and the tab will stick out a certain distance from the muntin or the rail. And then when you go to tool this, you'll hit that. You won't be able to tool it as steep as it needs to be, because that glazing point is sticking out too far. And you don't want that, because that's where a lot of putty will fail. Water will come in through that point, and you want a complete seal. So that's where you've got to sort of select the right glazing point for the job and for the window. But if you've got a big, wide glazing rabbet, those push pins are great. Super easy to deal with. And then you can see here, this window I did, you can see what I'm talking about. You can see the putty, which this isn't so bad. What you want to avoid is a bunch of it up there. And you're sitting there in your living room on your couch, and you're like, oh yeah, I should have done that. Why didn't I do that? I've been there for sure. So that sight line is really important. And that's true too if you're doing if you haven't taken the sash out of the frame and you're just doing a small little repair. You got to make sure you're thinking about the sight line all the time. And then the great thing about putty, you just clean it up as you go. You can reuse this stuff. So you end up with very little waste. You can see here too, and we'll show you in this demo, you've got to get this putty at the right consistency. When you pull it out of the bottle, it's going to be too stiff. And if you apply it when it's too stiff, well, you can kind of see it here. As you tool that, you'll start seeing cracks. So you want to knead the putty to the right consistency, and Caitlyn's going to show us how to do that, and you guys can come and grab it and feel what that feels like. That's really important. The other thing too, sometimes, is the putty knife will stick as you do this. I just dip it in some linseed oil to lube things up and go along. We didn't talk about corners, but corners can be a little tricky. Takes some practice, but they're really not that hard. The goal is you want a complete seal. You want a bevel so it's shedding water, right? You don't want water to be trapped anywhere. And then to clean it all up, by the time you get this done, there's going to be oil all over the glass. And you can use what's called whiting traditionally, but it's mix. Just grab some of that, pour it on here, use a brush. And it's pretty cool. As you brush that around, it'll just pick up all the oil that's on the glass. And you'll end up with a really clean surface. You don't really need to go over the putty with that, but it helps clean up the glass really well. So it's pretty basic. I mean, I don't know if you guys... It's just following the right steps and being careful. And you end up with a good result. Now, putty, and we're going to cheat tomorrow in our class because we don't have enough time. We're going to do this, but we're going to paint the same day. You never want to do that. So don't do that. It takes 3 to 5 days usually for that putty to skin over. And even then, it can be, if it's sitting in the sun or outside or whatever, it might take longer. I mean, it takes some time to really skin over hard enough before you paint. So that's an important step. You want to make sure you let it sit the correct amount of time. And you'll know when there's enough, it's skinned over enough to paint it. You'll be able to tell. So here's where I prime. And believe it or not, this is true, which is kind of crazy to think about. When you're painting, you want the primer and the paint to overlap onto the glass. And there's a couple of ways to do this, right? I think real traditionalists, and I think Caitlyn here is pretty good at it, they freehand it. So they'll just go with the brush and they'll get a really straight line and freehand it that way. And if you're good, that's great. And if you can live with a little bit of imperfection, that's good too. The other way is people just completely don't even care about it. They just overlap it and they come back and with a straight edge and score it and razor blade it off. And that works too. The controversy is people say, okay, you're overlapping this putty onto the glass. You want the edge of the paint to create a bond that's impermeable, right? If you cut that with a razor knife or you tape it and tear the tape up when it's dry, then you have an edge on the paint that's going to allow water to get in. If you freehand it, that doesn't happen, okay? My theory is, and maybe I'm wrong on this one, I tape it and then I pull the tape when it's wet. So that my hope is that it's going to reseal. I don't know. I've done both ways, and I've not really, honestly. Does it rain in Utah? I haven't seen that kind of failure, that often. But I think over time it makes sense to me. So that's why I put that on there with tape. So with tape, I'll just do a 1/16 of an inch over onto the glass. And then I pull tape when it's wet. And then let it dry. And I usually do 2 coats. And then I'll tape it again and paint it again. So that's the process I use. Everybody's got a little bit different maybe.
Quick question, sorry. If you're taking or if you're painting past the edge of the putty, are you having still another line of sight problem?
That's a good question, right? I'm glad you brought that up. So the question is, if you do a 1/16 inch onto the glass, what's that going to do to the sight line? It's going to obscure the sight line. So a lot of people will tool the putty a 1/16 of an inch short of the sight line, so that when they end up painting, the paint and the sight line line up. The putty is a little bit closer in. I personally don't mind the 1/16 of an inch, but that's what some people do. They'll tool it so that they leave space for that. Yeah. So this is all pretty basic stuff there. Then you end up, with a pretty good job. You got these surfaces that are not painted, the top, the sides, the side here. the inside of this meeting rail where it's going to meet up with the other sash. You don't want to paint that. Yeah. So that's sort of what you're trying to achieve. So installing, is really just a reversal of what you did to pull it out. The one thing I do want to mention, and I don't really talk about here, these channels that the sash are riding in, you want to spend some time cleaning them out. You want to get paint out of there because they've been painted over too. And, you use the same technique. You can use a infrared stripper. You can use a chemical stripper. You can use whatever it is. You probably won't get it all out of there, but you want that surface to be smooth and as clean of paint as possible. That's the goal. And, sometimes you're going to put weather stripping in here. Maybe you're not. So you want to free that up as much as possible. Putting the sash back in, it's just really a reversal. I do the upper one first. So that goes in, I push it all the way down, then I can put the parting bead in place. And then the last one, you just swing it in and install the stop. I typically just do the thickness of a putty knife when I'm figuring out this gap right here. I'll use the thickness of that so that there's a little bit of room in there for it to move around. The one thing I should mention about the parting bead is there's really no reason to nail it back into place. If it's a little loose, you can tack it back in. And if you look back, let's see, do we have... You can kind of see here, these things tend to, over time, come out and bow out. And so a lot of them have been nailed near the bottom. And I think that's because water is coming up and getting in there and causing problems. So sometimes you'll want to nail that lower section so that it's a uniform, plumb surface for that thing to ride on. But if it didn't survive, you put a new one in. But it's pretty simple. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. We got some questions up here now. I don't know. Oh, they're going to come over. Okay, so these are just the same pictures. Weather stripping. Darn, I want that to move. So here's what I've found. Weather stripping is really important, and you can't, you want to be able to do it if you can. A lot of times the tolerances in these channels and between the sash and the channel doesn't give you much room for it. And I know there's companies out there that will you can take your windows, I think even over to here to Phil Kearns at American Heritage, and they can install weather stripping for you. My experience has been that when you rebuild these and you get them back into place, they're so tight, or the tolerances are just right so they can function, and you might find out you don't need it as much as you thought you did. It's really easy to use spring bronze, and this is a good example of how to do it. It goes in the channel, it goes on the bottom of the sash, it goes on the inside of the upper sash. This is a great way to weather strip a wood window. It's probably the best way. I mean, they make vinyl versions of this stuff like they talk about on here, but the spring bronze stuff looks great. It's more maybe appropriate to the window. It's readily available. This is one that I found a pile of at my friend's place down in Escalante. I don't know. He had a bunch of these. But I have one downstairs to show, but I didn't bring it up. This thing fits inside the channel. And it's got a springed edge here and a sprung edge here. And you tack in the top, but you just put it in the channel. It it just goes in. I don't even know if it's still available on the market, but these work great. And they're easy to put in and out and move around. And sometimes you may have to trim with a table saw on the sash to get them to fit, but they're pretty good. And then there's a guy, he's called the Craftsman's Blog, I think is his name, and I forget his name. And this thing is super cool. I made my own instead of buying it from him, but you can buy it from him. When those two sashes come together, you've got that meeting rail, and you've got this channel. Here's the parting bead, and you've got an opening in here, a sash rope or the mortise here. This effectively blocks where a lot of air can come in, just this little corner piece. And he makes it, I think it's out of felt and brass, and you just tack it in. It's actually a really cool little piece and pretty inexpensive. That's a great way to stop any kind of air coming in. But this spring bronze, this is a great way to go. And you'll see it all over the place on old windows. We lived in Milwaukee for a couple of years, and the house was a period revival that had all wood windows. Everything was weather stripped with that. And once you get it in place, it goes forever. It'll go a long, long time, especially if you don't paint it. So this is, like Caitlyn was saying, this is almost a whole class in itself right here. So we're not going to talk more about that. I throw this in here because lead paint is always a thing. Go and educate yourself about it. The state has a good site, so does the federal. You follow these guidelines, you're going to be able to safely do this work. If you're hiring somebody in Utah, they've got to be certified. If you do it yourself, you can do it yourself, but follow their guidelines. It's worth it, just to avoid any kind of problems. And then I put in some resources here. I always, whenever I start a preservation project or work on an old house, I learned this down at TBSI, go to the National Park Service and find if they've got a preservation brief. I always start there, and that to me is the gold standard. There's a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of good stuff online. There's a lot of stuff that's not complete or kind of junky online. These things, that's where you want to start. And then you can go from there, obviously. This is a great book that I've used before. The Craftsman blog we talked about. Bob Yap, who's done it all a million times and is really good.
Salt Lake County has a lead hazard reduction program.
They do. So how does that? Okay.
Once they identify lead, then it's a eligible project. It's any lead-based paint hazard that they find through the risk assessment. So it's a great resource.
So he had mentioned, Salt Lake County has, it's a lead abatement program, is that what you called it? Lead hazard reduction.
It's an interim control, but there are abatement opportunities once the material is in a deteriorating condition that can be. But traditionally, it's this grant in particular. We've had different grants that were abatement and interim control.
Oh, that's.
Reduction, but it's the federal program, so it's HUD funded.
So there's resources there. That's really great. I didn't know that. Wow. Well, yeah, take advantage. I mean, if you have an old house, there's lead paint in it. I mean, some of it's fine because it's been covered over and it's not fungible. It's not flying around. But that's great. That's a good thing to know. Bob Yap is a great source for information. John Leake, I think is how his name is pronounced. He's been around forever. These guys sort of have started this restoration standard for wood windows. And if you want to go and do a deep dive like on energy efficiency and all that stuff, those guys have done all that work. And there's a ton of information there. So I highly recommend them. Earth and Flax is sort of super fancy. Everything's linseed oil based, European sort of way of doing it. But they sell great materials there too. But there may be others. There's so many online now. And when I first started doing this 15 years ago, I think John was the only guy out there that I really could find online that was doing things the right way. But, you know, oh, Caitlyn, how come you're not on there? You were on it before. So, well, yeah, anyway, you can email me, you can email Caitlyn. In fact, Caitlyn's going to start her own business up here in Salt Lake doing wood windows. So if you guys have questions or, you know, want to talk about nerdy wood window stuff, we're more than happy to do it. Any questions?
Yeah, just on average, like a regular double hung, like how many man hours are you talking? I mean, that looks
So
more intensive.
it can be. You actually, once you get a system down, I mean, I'll do 2 sashes. I mean, I'm not the fastest worker. Oh, sorry, the question. How many man hours to do 1 sash? One window, it probably takes me a day.
Finish that.
With the wait time.
Well, yeah, add the wait time in there.
Yeah.
So the wait time, you got to let that sit overnight, you know, or 3 or 4 days for that putty to set up. Yeah, more than a couple of years. But yeah, like I like the process. It's sort of methodical. If you guys are doing it, I'm assuming you guys are doing it for business or for work, where that stuff really matters. I think you can set your system up to be pretty efficient. I think tomorrow, you guys going to be here tomorrow? Are you guys coming to that? Okay. But you can set up workstations and you can get this process down to be pretty quick. That Craftsman blog that I was showing you about earlier, he does it professionally. Go check out some of his resources. He might have more information about that. But once you get that process down, you can see it's not that complicated. There is some time you got to wait around to get stuff done, but you can move pretty quick. What we're doing tomorrow is we'll have 3 different workstations. So we're going to pull a sash out up here. We're going to strip it down, deglaze it. We're going to fix any problems in the frame and the sash, and then we're going to reglaze it, and we're going to hope to have that done before noon. So if you set up workstations and you have the right tools, you can move pretty quick.
I have a question
Yeah.
online. If you currently have wood trim on the outside, is it ever good to cover it with vinyl?
No. If you ever have wood trim on the outside, are they talking about case trim around the window?
Aluminum wrap or something.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you know, it's funny because I think covering it up, it's funny because earlier in the previous presentation, they showed those storefronts that had aluminum on them. And a lot of times that ends up preserving what's underneath. You know, they may have hacked it all up to be able to have it fit on there, but oftentimes it can help preserve stuff, but it also can trap moisture and water. And the worst thing for any kind of surface, wood, brick, or anything, is to have moisture trapped in there. It needs to be able to breathe. And I think that's part of the problem with these wood windows. When the edges get painted and the bottoms get painted, that blocks any kind of way for moisture to get out of that sash. And then you end up with rot happening. So covering things up is usually not a good way to go. Yeah. Well, I think what we're going to do is show you guys, if you want to come up here, you can, just how to reglaze this sash right here. Yeah, you're welcome to come up and look, and I don't know if oh, you got the camera right there. Okay, great. Yeah, I think use those, yeah. That's fine. That's okay. We can we can talk about that. I can grab that. I'm gonna pass that around, yeah. She is. Yeah.
I can try. Is that okay? So this is a good brand of glazing putty. Typically, when it comes, it's been sitting for a while, so you want to mix it up a bit. You can see oils are kind of sitting around. So I'm just gonna dump it out, and you want to take the whole thing out because it just kind of helps the, I don't know. But yeah, get all the parts that are all needing to be mixed around again. We won't use all of this, obviously, for one window, but. And if you ever open a thing of putty and there's a lot of oil at the top, it's probably not able to be used anymore, but you can try, but I don't know. It's kind of depends on how well. See, so under the bottom, there's quite a lot of liquid there that we're trying to capture back into the top as well. So, I'm also a ceramic artist, so this is fun because you can kind of wedge it like you do for clay. But just kind of spend some time. There's some hard parts in here, kind of here where it's kind of cracking, but some parts where it's super soft, so we're just gonna kind of mush it around. And you can see it kind of sticks to your hands where the parts where it's too little. Like this part's pretty wet, but this part's pretty dry. So it really is just a kind of consistency practice till it's even throughout. And luckily our hands are pretty good at telling our brains things. So I don't know if anyone cares to touch this stuff, but I will take a kind of section out.
So, is that ready to roll now?
It's pretty good. Yeah, my hands are all really sticky now, but basically, as long as it's consistent throughout, that's kind of the theory.
Okay.
I still have some hard parts in here, so I might mix it up a bit more. So it is an elastic compound, so it kind of never truly dries to like rock hard necessarily, which is why you should not use certain types of compound. This is kind of the one that everyone uses, Sarco, dual glaze.
So is there a way to do a double paned one, or is that just like one of those candles?
The theory is double paned is you can achieve that with a storm window.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can.
You can.
You can cut this glazing around it. You can cut it, disassemble it and cut it. But I think here's the thing about that. And Bob, yeah, has a great idea. The R value of glass.
Here, do you want to take the mic?
So if you have an R value of 0, and you add another piece of glass that has an R value of 0. I'm not great at math, but that's pretty much 0. So some of the new windows have a gas or argon gas or something in there that gives it a little bit of an R value. So you're not gaining much by doing double pane. Where they are great is for sound.
Oh.
They're really good if you live on a busy street. So.
Yeah, but storm windows do the same thing.
They do.
Make interior storm windows and exterior. There's a whole wrap around
There's
go down there.
Yeah, you can make your own storms.
Other glazing points.
So here is, yeah, that's that kind. diamond
so
kind.
This is the ones that are the push point. You can do kind of with this little ledge, and then here's another kind. Kind of pick and choose. The biggest part that really matters is then. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
it's pretty tough because
Yeah, I can.
the old growth wood is.
That's another reason to not throw them away.
That's another reason.
Usually old growth wood that's, you know.
So just kind of slowly push it in. Here you can see that we're talking about the pin is kind of right along this line here. So in theory, you want it to be a little bit shy of that.
Yeah, like it
Um,
would be better if you had something like this. You don't have to, I mean,
Yeah, those
if you
are
had
harder to
something
put.
like this, they're harder to push in with a putty knife. But if you had something like that, that was holding the glass in but not extending beyond the sight line of the glazing rabbet, that would be ideal. And so that's why these push pins,
Yeah, or the diamond ones that are a mechanical spring-loaded thing.
you can get a driver, you can get a little hand tool, I think, for about $12 that'll work with all of these. So you can, that's probably the best way to go.
Did you already do the bedding on that?
We did
Didn't
not
do that.
do the bedding. Getting ahead of ourselves, huh?
No,
That's good.
it was a test to make sure you're paying attention.
I remember.
So you don't
You haven't done the bedding?
You don't have to bed. The bedding is there.
Those use the pulp then, not real glaze.
Yeah, caulk is,
Telling you that.
yeah.
Do
Um,
that.
so
yeah.
now I'm gonna try to safely take this out, which is also fun.
Bedding it, the glazing rabbet can be uneven. And so it just fills any voids.
It also
gives-
helps it to not rattle around
Yeah.
anymore, a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has already been magically cleaned.
Yeah, I'll grab that.
Okay.
Mhm.
Set that thing, yes.
Would you hold that? If you want to try this, anybody want to try it? You're welcome to try
Your
it.
hands are gonna be pretty messy.
There's a lot of different kinds of glazing putty out there. This stuff is pretty darn good.
Yeah, this is kind of,
Go to Ace Hardware, they're going to have something from DAP,
yeah,
DAP 33.
yeah.
It's not the greatest, but in a pinch, you can't get anything else. I've done windows with DAP.
Yeah.
But this stuff
It's hello
works a lot better.
restorationwest@gmail. Restoration.
So here's one way to do it.
West.
Okay,
If
yes.
you grab this, and you just
Yeah.
push in with your thumb like that.
Perfect, you got
Yep.
your edge.
Yeah, or you can use your palm. See, you just want to get that in there so that it's.
And the good thing about putty is that it's messy, but you can kind of just take it up again and start over.
So it kind of looks like about so.
Take a picture. Thank you.
Yes, oh, that was your. So you have
Kind of shoving it in there.
issues.
Yeah. And more is better in this instance, I guess, because you can always take away the excess once you press it down. Because it's better to have more and then not have voids. Yeah, so like I'm pretty liberal on this side here. Because when you put the glass back down, it's going to smoosh out.
Right.
Proper
And then
term,
you just-
very technical term.
Which you then scrape off.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm interested to know the
So that rabbit is kind of also a stop to press against that kind of
Right.
cuts off with your teeth. It's kind of just practice, trial and it's just like Play-Doh.
And then it.
It kind of falls out, yeah, because it is very elastic. It's probably a lot softer than most people think putty is going to be,
Yeah.
I would think.
I think it's just I was thinking more Play-Doh consistency, but it's a little softer.
Yeah, it is. It has an interesting smell, like that's the linseed.
Yeah. My first instinct was it smelled like Play-Doh, but then I thought, no, it's more oil.
Yeah.
Almost oil. Not really great.
Yeah. It smells more natural than Play-Doh for
Yes,
sure.
yes.
More earthy. Not really.
Yes. No, this is really cool and really fun.
Okay.
I like
So we went crazy. No, that's okay. All right. Okay, you want to grab the glass?
But
We kind of
no, it's good.
Yeah.
It's you can't
can't really overdo it. That's
No.
what I was saying.
you can't overdo it.
Right that corner a little bit, but
But you see how you just got to be really careful when this is going back in.
so see how it's kind of smooshing, and you can really see it press down, and it's creating that kind of. And right here, there's a little bit of a void, so I'm going to try to press that out.
There's a little bit of one here too. So that's why it's not a bad thing to overfill it. Just get a bunch
So
in
when
there.
you find that, do you pop this,
Well, when you
pull it up and do a
when
little
we
more?
pin this, you'll be able to turn it over and clean all this off, and you'll be able to use a putty knife to push
a little
push
bit
it
more in a
yeah.
point.
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Just a trash window, right? You pull it from the garbage.
I did. I got all these. I took most of these out of the landfill.
So now I'm going to clear out this a bit so I can have space for the points to go in.
So my only caution here,
Yes.
when you hold this like this,
See, everyone's
is
learning.
if it goes in there and you do this or do anything like that,
Oh, I
break.
keep.
I always try to keep it
Hmm.
like that. Sorry, Caitlyn. I'm just
No, you're way
I always
more.
try to keep that as horizontal as you can against that glass. Anytime you're in a prying situation, you're going to break it. It's just going to happen. At some point, it will happen.
Okay, and then I guess if you want to do the glazing things as well, the points.
The ones without the little, because these are the ones I always use. I've never
Yeah.
tried the little
These are, they're
triangles.
just kind of harder.
Yeah.
You go in the flat. Is there a right way? They're all the same.
They're all the same
Yeah,
shape.
they're all the
So it's a lot more.
It's tricky, right? But
It's a
see how
lot.
Caitlin's doing it back and forth like that?
And the putty
And
knife
you
is
just sort of
flat
work flat.
against.
Right.
And yeah. And sometimes too, you can put your finger right on where and hold them together. And it's tough because that wood is
Yeah.
hard.
See, I
So
wouldn't.
if you have the special tool, which is only like $12, it'll fit that point, and you can just push it in and not worry about it.
Yeah. These are a little. I'm not gonna take it out because
So this one,
they take a lot more.
most of these
Pressure.
came from the Midwest. These big made windows and doors and all kinds of stuff, and they ship them here, especially after
Yeah.
the railroad, right? So when you see
And
that
these are
notice on the side
great.
of the road,
It's just sometimes in the profile.
Yeah, you can usually get it all the way in.
Yep, that sharp
and some
point.
people would put pins in
So you put the.
Like, I think I've
Yeah.
done it. One over here with a pin in it. I'll show you.
My mistake was using this flat screwdriver, and so you can't get quite low enough.
Oh yeah.
The window. Fortunately, it was a small
This one
pane.
has,
Yeah, this one's a little bit more of a flexible knife.
it also has a pin. The pin, it also
Yeah.
So we're gonna go 2 on each side. Actually, I'm gonna do 1 just to save time.
could be.
But
So if
I
it's
know
hard
they have the tracks.
so if it's
Kinda wiggle it
hard
back
to
and
write
forth.
little 20s,
go as flat against the glass.
I would think so.
I can.
Because I remember seeing little ropes
Yeah.
out the top. So
But that's what I would have. That's okay,
Yeah.
because that thing's not gonna bend,
It's small. It's not. It's just.
maybe in the doghouse.
Chicken coop.
Yeah, chicken.
Oh, yeah, that's I'm gonna move because I'm not ambidextrous. Okay. Okay, now the next step that they're all pinned in is we're gonna clean up the inside on the flip side. So you can see all of the extra bedding.
Yeah, like you said, you can never put too much on there, really.
And here you go flat again.
Yeah, I just do flat. Or the other thing too. Here, there's no chance of you catching this on the edge of the glass anymore.
Okay.
So you can just do that. But you don't want. See how that has sort of a torn edge.
Yes.
You don't want that. You want that to be nice and smooth. And you can do that with, the edge raised like that, and you just push that in. Then you get a nice, clean, sealed surface there. The other thing you can do too with putty is just go grab it with your finger too if you want. It'll stick to itself and kind of clean it up that way too.
Okay. And however much of a perfectionist you are, you can go back and do that.
Yeah.
Spend forever on it. Now we're going to flip it back over. And the next step is to go back with even more putty. And that's where you can kind of do a couple things, roll it into a little snake and push it in that way. You just gotta, again, make sure there's no voids between that rabbit and the glass. So, however works best. I've seen people where they could do it really fast.
Yeah, some people are really fast at it.
I don't know how, but
One guy I noticed does it this way. He'll go like he'll just use the palm of his hand
and just look.
and just cruise along. But it's all about speed, I guess.
Yeah, for production.
But if you're not worried about that, you just want to make sure you get it packed in there, and you're not going to waste any.
Yeah.
And you can just kind of smear it with your palm. I don't know.
There's
Yeah.
more surface area there.
Yeah, you can just smash it in there.
And see how I kind of just took them up. So if you kind of mess up, even if once you tool it and you mess up, honestly, you can take it out again. Okay. And now the next step, and I'll do one and then leave the other three for whoever wants to come and do it, I guess.
The cool thing about it, you can't mess up. If you mess up, you just
So I kind of
keep going until you get good at it.
Yeah, and I kind of remember visually where that rabbit sight line is. It's not a 45 degree. It's kind of more like a 30-ish, possibly. So you kind of cut in and just pull.
I'm not putting a lot of pressure.
Oh, see, and there I hit the point because it's a little bit too wide for this rabbit, which that's kind of the reason why you have to pick the right one. Because I
You're
hit
not
that.
pushing really hard on that putty knife. You kind of equal pressure on the tip of it, and then what's resting against the rabbit.
And there's, yeah, hit there again. In theory, you want to do this all in one sweep, just to kind of keep, when you're cutting a piece of paper with scissors, you always make a straighter line when you go all at once.
So you
It's
can
the
also
same
see,
concept.
and this is pretty common, what happens right here,
Yeah, the thread pull.
where you get these voids when you're pulling it.
Yeah,
And if you're getting that, you can put a little bit of linseed oil on the putty knife, and that'll help smooth it out. You can go over it
I'm going to
again.
go over it again
Yeah.
because I hit the points. I'm going to go
But
out
you,
of that.
you want a smooth, uniform surface. You don't want any cracks in there or any kind of voids.
So would it help the linseed oil on that whole rabbit before would maybe help this?
It would,
It's pretty dry.
yeah. Also, too, when you don't mix the putty correctly, if it's too stiff, it'll do that. If it's, so that's when you see that, okay, maybe I need to knead this thing a little bit more and get it a little softer.
So I'm going to go at a bit of a wider angle so I just don't hit
Yeah.
those points again. Yeah, this is pretty dry.
There we are. Yeah, that's great.
See, you can just keep going. It really is.
Yeah.
Keep going because here it's a little bit too
It's okay.
pulled away a bit, but yeah. And then you can kind of just take
Yep.
that off.
Can you see all the oil in the glass? That's where you use that drywall or the whiting. You put it on there and just brush it off with a throwaway brush. And it'll take it right up.
So the corner, you kind of try to miter it in. Depends on how perfect you want to get with it.
Yeah,
It
you
takes
can
practice.
obsess about it, yeah.
Yeah, you really can get kind of crazy.
And I look at mine and I think, well, I can't do it much worse than it was done last time. You know?
Yeah.
True.
Some of them were a little scary.
Yeah, where you'll see where it's silicone in there or some other kind of caulk. And these will end up looking really good.
Yeah.
Really uniform, right?
Okay.
I see.
This was pretty. Might want to use a cleaner one.
But are they the same flexibleness?
Yeah.
Come. Well,
That angle's
no,
really
I-
pretty good because we're going to hit the point at some point. There you go.
So it's kind of, you pull it, you're not using your wrist, you're using the way you're doing it's perfect. You just keep your arm at that angle and you pull it through. And that way you get a nice, yeah, you're a pro.
Wow.
Good. Wow, that's beautiful. Nice job. Nice. And I like how you did that in one pass.
Yep.
That
So
was
you went a
excellent.
bit wider to not hit the
Yeah.
point, but on the other side,
Because I was just trying to
yeah.
get it, because I have no idea where it is. I have no idea. We probably have some line of sight problems on the back, but that's fine.
But
I don't know, you can always redo it too if you don't like the.
If you want to cut in a bit more.
I was just going to say, while they're doing this, and you probably gathered, but they are doing a full day workshop tomorrow. Registration is definitely full, but we will have it kind of cordoned off where you can watch. So if you are here tomorrow during our community day, feel free, or even before and after, feel free to just watch.
Yeah. And this had dry stuff on the back, so you kind of always want to have a clean
Yep.
knife, or else it is going to catch and kind of rip
Yeah, you want
those
to
cracks
clean.
in. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm being a hose.
And whenever you're, the line you're pulling it, if this isn't a flat surface, on the wood, it's also going to be weighty.
And I put the point here.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That's kind of the. This is very.
I've seen them on the shows. This one.
That, yeah.
With the wider one, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's what you do, but I like this if you can.
I think you just use it, you use one that you like, whatever you prefer.
Because, yeah, because you get your edges, your knife marks. And you do it like that.
You do.
Any other questions?
So when you turn this over now and look at the sight line, we'll see how we did. And if we didn't do well, you just tear it out and do it again.
Yeah.
You know?
Squish some more in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you look at that, we did pretty good. Like right there, it looks great, yeah. So you got, it's a little bit of putty there, but not much. And when you clean it up with the whiting and you brush all this out of there, it'll be nice. Yeah. There we go.
I think so. Is there any questions?
Yeah, are there any other questions? Otherwise, big thank you. This was awesome.
It's fun.
All right, thanks.
It's 2 hours. Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I found a card.
Oh, you did? With like a thank you for.
Thanks for joining us for the 2022 Preservation Conference. We are so excited to have you online. We can't wait to see you next year. Go out there, save some old buildings, and we'll see you in 2023.